All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Got a lot of people on. Yes, awesome. Y'all about to learn a ton of stuff. I'm really excited to have this inaugural episode. We've been doing the foraging show for the past month, or I have been on my own. And this is my first episode of having someone else come on the show and be a part of this. And Lexi is an awesome person. I'll get into her introduction in just a moment. And yeah, so basically this is called the Ecotherapy Hour, and that's a name that I chose because it's very all-encompassing. So ecotherapy is an emerging field that people talk about as a psychology mixed with ecology way of healing. And in my personal journey, ecology has been the most healing force in my life. Through doing tons of different therapy and whatnot, ecology and my connection with nature has been the main healing force. So really wanted to underline that. This is very broad topics. So this looks a lot of different ways. And we're really focusing on holistic health and wildcrafting today. And we're gonna basically get into talking a bit about Lexi and learning a bit about her path. And she's an experienced herbalist, so we're gonna really dive into that a little bit. We're gonna have about 15, 20 minutes of intro and interview. And then we're gonna have time to actually do some skill share. Really, really excited about this. We got some in-field footage to show you all that involves how to harvest wild oat. And then we're gonna talk about how to process it into medicine, how to make it into a tincture. And this really wraps into the discussion around therapy. And you guys can see on Lexi's screen, she's showing you the beautiful Milky Oat tincture that prepared fresh this morning. And a lot of this for me is, I just wanted to I like talking to Lexi. She's a good friend of mine, and I like to pick her brain about stuff. So this is a formal way for me to pick Lexi's brain, and then a lot of people to be able to tune into it and learn from as well. The world of herbal medicine is vast, and the more that you dive into it, the more that there's a lot of detail to get into. So we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty detail and hopefully leave you inspired to go out and harvest sustainably your own medicines and feel confident in doing so. So without further ado, yeah, this is Lexi here. I'm gonna wave at everybody so we know. Okay.
Hi.
This is Lexi.
Good to meet you and to see so many familiar faces and names.
You really brought a crew.
So good. Hi guys.
Yeah.
We did.
And yeah, Lexi is someone I've known for a few years now. She's someone I consider to be a peer on the path with me, someone who speaks the same language. And when we get to talking, I just always feel like there's so much to dialogue about that it's like this endless conversation, and we just usually forage together and then go our separate ways and then come back together. And it's always beautiful to have people you can just talk to like that for a long period of time. And yeah, Lexi's a trained clinical herbalist, graduated from Berkeley Herbal Center, 2019, according to your biography, and been immersed in nature since being a young child, and has an interesting story around her background getting into herbs, and we'll talk a bit about that. And yeah, the thing that I really appreciate about Lexi too, I could go on and on about this. This will be the last thing I say before we start talking more interactively. But Lexi's really a doer. She's someone who gets out there and actually engages with the environment and really strives to be a good environmental steward and works with the plants directly, works with cooking them, works with nourishing community around them. And I really appreciate that. Like someone who has the knowledge, the books, the know-how, and is teaching it, but is also out there doing it and living that lifestyle. So Lexi lives on a beautiful homestead in Montclair and really lives up this permaculture homesteading lifestyle. So yes, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being on the inaugural show.
Such a treat. And such a treat to get to be here with you, Brian, and with all of these beautiful faces to explore herbs and deepen our relationship with our herbal allies.
Absolutely.
I grew up being immersed in nature, and I also grew up not knowing about medicinal plants. And for me, I came to a a massive awakening in my early 20s. I was on a trim scene with people that for every day, all day, they talked about medicinal plants and healing story after healing story. And it was so wild, the magic that they talked about and the beauty and the profound synchronicities. And I was like, what is going on? I didn't have the context for the plants as being medicine. I just knew that they were beautiful and that I loved picking flowers, and just I found such beauty with the plants, but I didn't understand what was beneath them. And I had a profound, at the end of those weeks together, had both a profound yearning and a profound sadness, a huge grief for realizing my level of disconnection. And I set out on a really intensive path to learn about the plants and to start to learn about the magic that is so inherently embedded in working with the plant world. These allies are constantly winking at us and enticing us with their scents and their seductive growth patterns and their ways, their showy ways. And yeah, they have such potent personalities that are my body can take up sometimes in a far more easier way than I can with medicine from humans or medicine from my other parts of my life. And the plant world speaks in ways that are subtle and profound, and sometimes really loud and intense. But for the most part, they're ways that can integrate in a pretty in a gentle way. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate the beauty that's inherent to working with the plant world.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So today I'm excited to dive into one of my favorite plants. It's the oat plant, the wild oats.
Awesome. And that kind of brings me to my first question is, are there any like self-care practices? I know we always rap about this when we're out foraging and stuff, but curious if there's any self-care practices that you're implementing right now. Of course, we're in a time where people are more sensitive health-wise than maybe ever before, and are at least like known human history. And not to go into any sort of like cure-alls or remedies, but just curious about your personal path. I know we've talked at times where you were totally like not doing very many tinctures or anything like that, very intentionally, and then of course times when you're working with tinctures. So if there's anything you want to speak to around any self-care that's been helpful to you, always curious.
Yeah, my biggest, and I think my biggest and most profound self-care is really getting outside every day and being with the plants. It's very, very simple, but I am learning about the plants that are growing around me. There's this interesting disconnection from seeing so many people that I know and love and being immersed in a much more quiet world that is the plant world. And that's a really big blessing for me right now, to get to be in a more quiet space and to live with community that also appreciates quiet. Yeah, I would say my big self-cares these days are going in and out of drinking herbal infusions. So it's a nightly tea that I prepare with either oat straw or nettles, comfrey leaf, and I put it in a big French press, pour boiling water over it, and let it sit overnight and drink it in the morning. And that it feels like a flush of nutrition, a really deep mineralization, and a deep nourishment. But I think that the most connective, like what I'm really craving right now and finding to be the most satisfying, is really putting my hands in soil, playing with these plants that I'm learning about, planting plants, planting starts, harvesting, going around my neighborhood and identifying where are all the plants that I know and love, like doing mental maps of where are the plants that I know and love, so I can feel really rooted all throughout this home, all throughout. I live in a valley, and the more I know where, okay, there's a plum tree up the hill, and I think that they'll be ready in a month, and I know that there's wild chervil growing on the road right across the valley from me. The more I know these points of connection all around me, the more I feel expansive and agile to provide for myself and to make really delicious food for the people that I love.
Yeah. It's kind of I'm imagining it's a feeling of connection with your local land. And I love, like, you touching on that just so, like, naturally and fluidly. Like, it's not all about just intaking plants or like the endless amount of herbs and supplements and spices and foods and different protocols that we could be doing. But yeah, I mean, similar on my path, it's like the foraging is kind of an excuse to go out and be with the plants and to really, like, connect with the wildlife and the soil and what's happening. And I feel like as people who go out and do wildcrafting, foraging, gardening, all that stuff, like, we're on the front lines of being able to really connect with these beneficial aspects. And this is, like, it's such a freebie, like, not for everyone. There's definitely people who live in certain places where it's harder to go outside for various reasons, whether it's socioeconomic violence, you know, just being in cold places, etc. But one thing I'm always encouraging is somehow find a way to, like, trim a blade of grass out front, like something to connect, and just all the benefits of the microorganisms that are in the soil that are, like, more effective for curing or, you know, working with depression than something like Prozac. Just countless ways that we can be in relationship with the land and be receiving those ecotherapeutic benefits. It's not just always taking tinctures and whatnot, which is also amazing, of course. But yeah, really appreciating that answer.
In Chinese medicine, it's people first look at what is the setup of your home, and then they look at what is the food that you're eating, and then what are the herbs that you're taking, then acupressure, then acupuncture. It's really, how can we be integrated in a really simple and providing for ourselves lifestyle that's, like, it's so simple. And just for me, the more I know about plant identification and what the plants taste like and how they're growing around me, the more I am remembering that simplicity.
Absolutely. And I mean, do you want to touch a little bit on kind of how you got into this path? I think you did it a little bit in your intro, but just curious if you wanted to touch on that and anything around, like, your exploration of ancestry. I know that's a really fascinating thing that you've actually been on some journeys to really get in touch with your roots.
Yeah, my ancestry is largely from the British Isles in Western Europe. And a couple years ago, I went on an ancestral pilgrimage trip to Scotland in the fall time. Right as it was starting to get cold, I went to the Findhorn Eco Village in the northeast of Scotland. And as soon as I arrived in the British Isles, I felt a deep magnet that was pretty unlike anything I've ever experienced. This sense of both knowing that my bones were comprised of this place, and that there is a really, really deep knowing of this place. And also, like, I became pretty quickly aware of why my ancestors left. It is such an uncomfortable place to be. It is so cold and wet all the time. And it's like, okay, I know this place and I know the plants that live here. I felt like finding elders everywhere and blackberries and just nettles and all these plants that I knew so deeply. Finding them everywhere was so comforting. And it brought a lot of a deep feeling of belonging. The quest for home is really strong. It's a quest that I know that many are on, and there's this ancestral trauma that so many of us are working through of what does it look like to be displaced? What does it look like to be uprooted for centuries, for millennia? Like, to be people that are always on the move. What does it look like to find home? And to find home within ourselves. And for me, the finding home in myself has had a lot to do with my journey with the plants. And finding that so many of the plants that I know and love that are from my ancestry, also they're growing all around me, but in different forms, in forms that are adapted here. I grew up feeling really disconnected. Even though I was immersed in the beauty of the natural world, grew up feeling very disconnected from it. And when I was on the trim scene working with these people, learning about all these plants, I'd had a puncture wound from a dog bite. One of my major animal loves of my life died, and as he was dying, he bit me on the arm and he was a half wolf, and he like bit deep and strong, and I had these puncture bites that all the nerve sensation in this area died. And I showed it to these people. It was about a month fresh, and they said, oh, you can apply St. John's wort oil on those bites and the nerve sensation will grow back. And I was like, okay, that sounds crazy. Not knowing that my body was naturally regenerating all the time, and it could just have a reminder of how to do that. And so I tried it. I applied St. John's wort oil every day for a month, and then all the nerves grew back. Like within a month, my arm was like fully functioning again. I could feel the subtlest, gentlest sensation on my body again. And it for me, it just like, it shocked me so hard. Oh my God, like my body is always healing. There are plants that provide exactly the medicine that I need at any time. And lo and behold, St. John's wort was growing all around my house, which so often happens with plants, that the medicine that we're looking for is growing literally right outside our front doorstep.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so I became pretty fanatical and obsessive with learning about herbal medicine, and yeah, just diving into it in a really like avid way. And I read lots of books and just talked with so many people, and it was a while into it, that a couple years into my studies, that I realized that I could actually just learn from the plants.
Mm-hmm.
That I was so like yearning and excited for this medicine that I was trying so hard to pick it up everywhere around me. Mm-hmm. And then I heard and realized that by sitting with the plants and asking them, quieting myself down a lot and asking them questions and just observing them and paying attention to them, I could actually learn directly from them. And right. That's the ultimate medicine, because then I'm not going through hearsay about everybody's different experience. And it's still valuable to talk with people. I always talk with people about medicinal plants. I'm always excited to have those kind of conversations. But my biggest learnings have come straight from the plant itself, whether the living plant or working with it as a tincture or as an infusion or an oxymel or drinking a tea. Like the knowledge of the plants can come straight from the plants. It doesn't need to come through years of study or like trying to get every little bit of information you can. It's like that will go on a lifetime.
Right.
The world of plants is vast, and there are a billion people with a billion different experiences. But the plants will tell me exactly what I need to learn as I go.
I love that. I mean, I feel like we were doing that when we were working with the oats, just around knowing that like some of these things are not always studied. There's not a scientific study to prove every single thing that's out there in the natural world. And not everything is on the internet. Some things are still so rooted in the natural world that we can come directly towards them, ask them, observe them. I think a lot of times with like people talking about talking to plants and whatnot, it's like we're kind of waiting for some kind of vocabulary words to come from them, sentences to form, but I think it's more literal than that. And so when we were squeezing those oats and finding out they do have milk in them, despite this maybe not being the preferred variety, it's like we're learning from that stuff and then doing more research on it and finding out that, people do actually use that specific species for the same medicine. So having some confirmation around what we were learning firsthand. But I love that. I did not know that story about the dog bite. That's so powerful to like have a friend, your dog friend, like go in that way and like send you off with this sort of what seemed like a wound at a time, but actually turned into a really beautiful like emergence onto this path. So
as wounds so often do.
What's that?
As wounds so often do, especially when they're met with plant medicine. Totally.
Yeah, that pain is what often motivates people onto onto their healing paths. So that's really beautiful. I feel like I learn something new about you every time we hang out. So that's really beautiful. And St. John's wort, I feel like we had a comment in the chat, someone talking about wanting to learn how to make that. They have tons of St. John's wort. And I think St. John's wort is one of those European plants that's probably pretty connected with the ancestry that you come from. Not 100%, but I believe
that could be a whole other conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and if it's growing around you, that's awesome.
Yeah, because what you touched on about like most of the medicine you need is probably growing somewhere near you.
We don't need to import herbs for the most part.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, it's amazing how 20 minutes can fly by when we're talking. So I'm like, just to kind of wrap things up, I'm curious, like, any projects that you're excited about, anything that you want to share about before we kind of get out of the formal interview stage of this, and of course sharing where people can find you, most preferably.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of teaching these days, which is a powerful experience to learn about doing teaching in a virtual way, and I'm seeing that through in doing herb walk experiences through Zoom, and having trying to really simplify experiences. Like I work at the Berkeley Herbal Center in Berkeley, and we have an apprenticeship class that meets a couple of times a week, and I led them on an herb walk, but it was all over Zoom, and we had them find herbs in their garden spaces, and it's really interesting to see how, in moving away from people going places to learn information, how we can really just localize that information by people becoming more integrated with their home space. So I'm making a lot of videos these days on plant identification and working with medicinal plants. And yeah.
And do you prefer people find you on Instagram?
Facebook is good these days.
Facebook is good these days. So
I'm working a lot with sensuality in women, and men as well, but learning to simplify sensuality and really looking at what is the magic of our sensuality and of our own juiciness, especially in this time where there's a lot of uncertainty, how to cultivate that sense of fertility and juiciness and really dive into the void in the midst of massive unknowing.
Absolutely.
And that work people can find more about at my website, alchemistress.world. And I'm working one-on-one with people.
All right, I'm going to put this into the chat just so people can find your website. And then we'll also upload this to YouTube, and I will put the links to your different work in the show notes, so to speak. And I hope I'm spelling this right. Maybe you'll look into the chat and double check on me, but I think I am.
That's it.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Lexi. It's so cool to get to know you in a different way and be able to just sit down and actually talk. We're always kind of side by side in the field doing stuff. So wonderful. And if people have any more questions for Lexi, we'll have some time in Q&A at the end to talk about the wild oat that we're about to explore.
Talk about the oats.
Yes, and feel free to drop, comments, questions, just chat in the chat. You guys can chat with each other. That's totally awesome. This is like a live TV show that we maybe always dreamed about as kids, being able to talk to people on the screen. So yeah, we'll have more time for Q&A at the end. And yeah, you want to jump into the oats?
Yes.
All right. So first and foremost, we're going to get down into some nerdy botany to start off with. And I promise you guys, this is cool stuff and you're going to learn a lot. And then we're going to get into some infield video and then talk about tincture making. So let's just jump right in because this is the Ecotherapy Hour. We're trying to keep it to an hour. And here is a share screen. You guys should be seeing 3 heads of oats on the screen right now. Is everyone seeing that? Can I get a head nod from anyone out there? Okay, wonderful. Cool, thank you. And And this is the oat identification portion. So milky oats, just for a little bit of background, grow all over around here out in California. There are places where people cultivate them for medicinal uses, but we have them. They're actually considered a noxious invasive plant around here and are often sprayed with pesticides or mowed down. But we want to differentiate the three different kinds. On the far left here, you're going to be seeing what's called Avena sativa, all right? The Avena sativa is like the typical oat that you would eat for breakfast or that's in like your Aveeno face wash. That's Avena sativa. That's the cultivated oat. One thing, this does grow out in the wild in certain places. I don't really see it here in the Bay Area where we are, but in Southern California and other places around the US, you'll actually see this plant growing wild. But this one, you'll see it doesn't have those kind of long hair filaments coming out. Those are called awns. But it's quite plump and it doesn't have those straight awns on it. So that's Avena sativa on the far left. That one's great for medicine. That's the one that's the most studied. In the middle here, we have Avena fatua, all right? This is often called the wild milky oat. This is growing in a lot of places in Northern California. And it has these long awns on it, okay? If you see, we'll see the plant in just a minute in its live form, so we'll talk a little more identification specs, but it's a pretty easy one to identify. Grasses can be complicated and a little tricky, but oat's a good one to start off with because it's pretty easy. So in the middle there, that's Avena fatua, or the wild milky oat. And this is the relative of the Avena sativa, the cultivated oat, all right? And then here on the far right, this one is called Vena Barbata. This is the narrow oat, all right? Telling it apart from Avena fatua is a bit difficult. They're smaller, they're slender, and they have very similar structures. Typically the plants are a little bit smaller, but it's not 100%. Depends on the growing conditions, but they all sort of work the same way, all right? Avena sativa, of course, being the one that's been the most cultivated and studied, and then these two wild versions that operate pretty much the exact same. And I would speculate, I don't know of any studies that have been done on this, but a lot of times wild plants will have more of the properties that you want in them actually, because they haven't been altered by people for just plumpness or ease of harvest. They have more medicinal properties typically. So these are great ones to collect out in the wild, and they're a good one to start off with when it comes to wildcrafting because they're so abundant. And, you know, people talk about, we'll get into a little bit about the ethics of harvesting, but people talk about how the wild oat, when it first came over here, when this place was first being colonized, which is just over 200 years ago, California is very recently colonized in comparison to other places. But, you know, it took over a lot of the native bunchgrass lands. So we don't have a whole lot of California native bunchgrass lands around anymore because Avena is so aggressive at reseeding itself and blocking those out. So it's not one that you're necessarily depleting by wildcrafting it. And, you know, I just think we always have to pay homage to the indigenous people of this land. The Ohlone land is what I'm on right now. And I just love the approach, which is, you know, apparently once this came over with the Spanish people and started taking over, the Ohlone were immediately using it for cereal grains. There was no like, you know, we got to eradicate this. Let's like keep this out. It was like, oh, it's here. We can't really stop it. Like, let's use it, you know? So I love adopting that approach as we talk about medicine making with it. We're not going to talk about making food out of it today, but people do actually make food from the wild oats as well. So we're going to get into this video, and it's going to show various stages of oat harvest, and me and Lexi will go back and forth talking about what's going on in the video and the relative points about how you harvest and what she's actually doing in the field. So I'll let you narrate a good bit, Lexi, and I'll try to jump in with relevant speaking points as I kind of know the flow of the video a little more. So y'all should be seeing a share screen video of Lexi out in the field here. And let's jump into it. What I love about this part, I started off with this part intentionally, was that you were singing to the oats. And that was really sweet. And we're just in a very large field of, there's a lot of oats right here. We were talking some philosophy and whatnot. That always comes up when we're harvesting.
And I'm going around with, so I'm making a Milky Oat tincture, and I'm going around with a bottle of alcohol. It's about 40% cane sugar alcohol with about 40 to 45% spring water and 15% alcohol, 15% apple cider vinegar. And I'm doing that to get different constituents, different parts out of the Milky Oats. Oats are really high in silica, which is a precursor to the production of collagen in the body. Silica strengthens nails, hair, the intestines. Every cell in the body is benefited by having more silica in the diet. And that's silica and other minerals are best extracted in a medium of that's really acidic, like apple cider vinegar or other vinegars. The alcohol provides a preservation of the medicine and a stabilization. Oats, I find, extract really well in water. I love to make oat tea, oat straw infusion, and I find that oats just feel like a water kind of plant. I like to keep alcohol in general as low as possible. I feel like my body and most of our bodies are detoxing enough as it is and pretty taxed as it is, given just everything that we're exposed to these days. So keeping alcohol to a minimum is what I like to do with my tinctures.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm in the same boat with you. And the one trick that I like to do with that is when I do have an alcohol tincture is put it into hot water. And to my understanding, that evaporates a lot of the alcohol and the medicinal properties. So, and did you speak to like why you're doing it so fresh? Like, why do you have the alcohol?
I didn't talk about that. So there are many different ways to work with oats. Of course, we have our common oatmeal, which is a great way to work with oats, but that's not the wild oat. What I'm doing here is making a Milky Oat tincture. So I'm identifying first that the plant is in its milky stage by squeezing one of the seeds, as I would here, squeezing it, and when a white milky latex is exuded from the seed, not something, this is fresh enough that this plant has that milky latex coming out of the squeezed seed pod. When that, sorry.
How does it taste over there?
Oh, those are dangerous.
They do have those spikes on them.
Yeah, dude, I just got one in my mouth. So when that, sorry, just got one of the oat hairs stuck on my mouth. They're dangerous.
They're trying to cling on.
Treated well. When that white milky latex is coming out, that's a sign that that's what we're looking for as a restorative to the nervous system. So there are many different parts of the oat plant that help with the nervous system. There's, of course, the very simple part of just sitting in a field of oats. I think that I would love for everybody just to pause for a moment and consider, what would it be like for you to be sitting in a field of oats with the sun gazing down on you and the wind gently whispering through the fields and whispering of the oats. That sensation is much of what oats help our bodies experience on a daily level. It's not like a hard hitting, like this is an intense medicine. It's like, it's a very gentle medicine, and it helps our bodies feel gentle again. And it does that through many different ways. The two primary ways that it works that I'm familiar with are its mineral rich content and the milky latex, the latex of the oat that helps recoat the myelin sheaths of the nervous system. So over time, as we go about our day and are exposed to stressors, internally imposed, externally derived, that over time our myelin sheaths, which are effectively the tape around the wires of our electrical system, the nerves, the myelin sheaths break down over time. There is a class of nerves, a class of nervine plants that help rebuild the myelin sheaths so that nervous signals can fire more properly in the body. These are known as nerve tonics, and Milky Oats is a nerve tonic. Other nerve tonics include St. John's wort. actually helping to rebuild the nerves. Skullcap, lion's mane is known to do that throughout the nervous system, especially in the brain. So Milky Oats really helps our body feel the nervous impulses, the electrical vitality of our body's responses to the world in a more soothed, easeful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard Milky Oats be referred to as a nootropic as well. And that's a big meme these days, people trying to take care of brain health, and lion's mane, of course, being one of those really famous mushrooms around, being able to help with that. But yeah, I mean, Milky Oats is such a natural nootropic. You know, those things are extremely costly when it comes to trying to buy them, but this is something that's growing so easily around us. So I know we kind of just went through the video, and there's probably questions about that. But I'd love to get into what your process is around making the tincture, and when you actually brought it home after this.
Yeah, so when we were in the field, you saw that I had the quart-sized mason jar that had a little bit of alcohol. I filled it and was shaking it, spiraling it, and as I would put the oat seeds into the tincture, they would kind of like fluff up and get kind of scattered within the tincture, and as I would shake it around, they would all file into line, which is really helpful for making sure that I'm getting the maximum amount of oat for the alcohol. Again, when I'm taking tinctures, I want there to be the most medicine for the least amount of alcohol. So I filled it until it was completely just covered with alcohol. And then I took that home and pretty quickly blended it up. In my high-speed blender, you could do this in most blenders. You don't need to blend it up if you don't have a blender. But that helps every part of the plant be exposed to the extracting mediums of apple cider vinegar, water, and alcohol.
So you put water, alcohol, and apple cider vinegar in there. And when we were in the field, you were preserving it in 45% cane alcohol.
I hadn't put apple cider vinegar in at the time, but you can do that ahead of time.
And that's an optional thing. I see someone in the chat asking if you can avoid the vinegar.
Yeah. Most that are in the store don't have vinegar in them, or most that are sold commercially don't have vinegar. I put the vinegar in because, again, vinegar helps extract minerals. And with oats in general, I'm looking to get some of the silica, that in addition to other minerals that are in the oats.
So you're doing basically a triple extraction in a way, with water, vinegar, and alcohol.
Yeah.
And is there any certain, I mean, I know in the video it shows you have alcohol about a third full in the jar, and then you pack it full with the oats. And then is there any proportion you're going for when it comes to like adding the water and the vinegar in?
This is a folk method. So folk method is basically you go with what your gut tells you to do. It's not a formal method. It's because I'm packing it in the field, I could do something if I wanted to make sure that it was like a 1:5 ratio with as far as weight goes of plant to alcohol, which is 1:5, 1:4 of 4 of plant to alcohol. Those are standard ratios, and in the folk method, you don't usually work with those kind of ratios. You just want to make sure that when I'm thinking about the amount of alcohol that I'm wanting to have in my tincture, I'm seeing that there's a minimum amount of alcohol that any liquid needs in order to be shelf stable. Alcohol slows down biological decomposition. So we want for something to be at least 20% alcohol if it's going to be shelf stable. When it's at a really high alcohol percentage, we're compromising the amount of water which we're having as an extraction method and the amount of apple cider vinegar that we're having. Water, again, is the method that I prefer for working with oats, and so I'm trying to find out what is the minimum amount of alcohol that I can have in order to make this shelf stable.
Got it. So, I mean, it sounds like to me, there's those three different ways of extracting it, and then you're grinding it up to expose as much surface area as possible. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the gist of it is you're just wanting to get as much medicine into that menstruum, into your liquids as possible, and then hopefully be able to work with what would be like a minimum effective dose, where you're
Mm-hmm.
able to have a really strong tincture that you could maybe have a couple of drops of.
Yeah, well, with oats, so oats are a tonic plant, and that's, as I see them in the ecosystem at large, they grow in massive abundance.
Mhm.
And often, but not necessarily, but often the plants that do grow a large amount of their medicine, often they are plants that we can work with in a really large way.
Mhm.
So oats, you can have it every day for breakfast. You can make an oat straw infusion and take an ounce or so of oat straw, this stuff, and put it in a quart size container, pour boiling water over it, and drink it in the morning. You can
Mhm.
do that every day. And these same goes with the tincture. It's a medicine that you're going to want a lot of in order to feel its effects.
Okay.
There are plants that are drop dose plants where you only need a little bit of their medicine, and sometimes you only want a little bit of their medicine to get at um, to experience them as medicine rather than just as like flavored alcohol or flavored water.
Mhm.
But with oats, I find oats are best when taken in a large amount, at least a dropper full a couple times a day, and over a large period of time. And when we have the time and space within ourselves to really receive that medicine,
Mhm.
it's like if you were in a harried space and you're like trying to run a huge, like a business, and you're like always moving around, and you go and you sit in that oat field and you're like, okay, like I need this medicine, and you're just like in that kind of like CEO, like needing to do your shit really quick pace, you're not really going to get the medicine of that oat field. Maybe you will, but it won't have that same effect as if you were in quarantine and you went and sat in that oat field and you're like, this is it. So oats, I find, just as we can experience them in the greater ecosystem at large, when we can experience them so much better when we're in a relaxed, peaceful, grounded state. Um, I find the same with working with their medicine internally.
Absolutely. I love how you frame it in that bigger picture as well. It's almost like we have to meet the oats where they're at in
Mm-hmm.
order, like on their frequency, in order to
Yeah,
really receive the medicine properly. And it's really that anti-anxiety calming medicine that I feel like oats are most known for. But I love that holistic approach of like actually sitting in the field, being with those long strands of oat coming up with their nodding heads and really relaxing into that entire field. And then also when you're taking that medicine, you're saying that it's going to work better when you're in um, that same vibration that the oats are in, which I think makes perfect sense. Even if it sounds out there at all to people, I think that's go out there and try it for yourself. I would say I imagine you might
Mhm.
have the same experience. So that's really cool. And then as far as oat straw goes, I understand that the time to harvest is once the heads are starting to nod, so about right now. And
Mhm.
also I know there's a ton we could go into here. I'm sure some of this will come up in questions, but those nodding heads that have the milk in them, I would say that the time of their milkiness is from anywhere from like maybe a week to 2 weeks max in my experience.
Mhm.
So you have sort of a short window to collect these things. Go
Mhm.
to different ecosystems that have them. If you miss one ecosystem that has the oats and you don't find the milky ones if they're too late, they can also be too early. So at times you'll try to squeeze them and no milk will come out. And they might be in their flower pollination stage then. You can come back a week later and then you'll be able to squeeze them and get that milk out. That's when you want to grab them, put them straight into your alcohol. But then if you catch them too late, they're going to be browned out. They'll be more yellowish brown. And when you squeeze them, they're not going to have milk. So someone was asking what part of the plant went into the tincture. So hopefully that answered it a little bit, but it's the tops that Lexi's showing y'all
Yeah,
right
and I
there.
can show you. So I collected oats to dry and use in an oat straw infusion. So I'll show you what I did as though this was still in the ground. I would take probably the top 2/3 of the oats and pinch my fingers around them and strip them to the end. Whether or not we want to harvest the whole plant, it's curious, as this is an invasive plant. When we strip off all the seeds, this is an annual plant, and when we strip the seeds, it won't come back. This particular plant will die. In a couple of weeks, it will become brown, and as the chlorophyll drips from it, and it loses life. So if I strip all the seeds, this plant is gone. Its genetics are gone. But if I strip 2/3 and I leave these seeds to fully develop into their plump brown state, they will fall on the ground and they will repopulate the earth with this plant. And this is it's a big and ongoing discussion about if this is a plant that we want to have repopulating this area. So as we consider that we are the wild tenders of this area, what does it look like to harvest this plant in a good way? I think it's a reminder that it's really important to have relationships with the areas where we're harvesting.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big discussion and I think the thing that we came to, I think, is a really beautiful way to frame it, is the biodiversity being probably the main factor that we're considering when it comes to harvesting. And there's tons of information about there and all kinds of conflicting information about how to harvest things and only harvest 1/3 or only harvest 1/8. And I think what we're really getting at here is it's very contextual. So with something like oats, that could be highly invasive. In our area, we're giving you the information about how the plant cycle works, but it's going to be different in different contexts. And the real line that we kind of toe as foragers is like, I love a lot of the invasive plants and I want them to continue so I can eat them. And I also love a lot of the native plants and I want them to have a place to thrive. So it's kind of like, how do you tend to both of those needs of the ecosystem? And continue to be able to go back to those places and harvest some of those plants that are in abundance. So I think at the end of the day, it's biodiversity. It's having a lot of different plants still out there. So we're not looking to eradicate them all, but just so you guys know, like I love how Lexi broke that down around like how it just reseeds. Like what a simple thing that we're not necessarily taught in grade school. So that's the information. That's how it goes to seed, and do as you will, you know.
Yeah.
There's no right answer necessarily.
Yeah, when the second we go out into an ecosystem, we are becoming part of it. And how we do that, how we bring more diversity, how we bring more monoculture, how we bring more health and vitality to a system, it depends on how we walk in that place and how we make offerings and how we take from that land and how we give to that land. It's like the land, sometimes it can feel amorphous, and sometimes the land is like a person. And when we approach the land and we give it an offering and we sing it a song, it's like, who doesn't want to be given an offering? Who doesn't want to have a song sung to them? Like it's such a beautiful, who doesn't want to have water given to them when they're thirsty? Like these are so important. Yeah, Beatrice, thank you. Only take the plant what you need. And you can grow this at home. Like these are seeds that I could take these seeds from ripe seeds and plant them in my home, and then I would have direct relationship, even stronger relationship with the land that I'm growing on, that I'm growing on, and that the plants are growing on. I think as much as possible, really bring these plants into a place that you can be in relationship with. And we were talking about this as we were harvesting today, that so much about this is it's a love story, and this is about us being in love with the land. And the more we can be in love with the land, the more we'll fight for people to not spray Roundup on the land, and to make sure that the waterways are clean. The more we can fall madly in love with the land around us, the more we will fight for that, because that's just a function of love. You fight for what you love.
Exactly.
Something that I didn't mention with harvesting oats that applies to other plants that are really high in mineral content is we want to make sure that, especially with these plants, that we're taking them from areas that are have really clean soils. that their bodies take up heavy minerals as they take up the minerals, heavy metals as they take up the minerals. And so to make sure that you're harvesting from places that aren't right next to the road or that are in really clean soils. Oftentimes plants like thistle that are so abundant in areas they're taking what they do in our body as they bring deep cleansing to our liver. They're also bringing deep cleansing to the land. And oats hold a lot. They hold whatever they are growing in. So
absolutely. That's a good point. And that brings me to a subtlety of the harvest of the straw versus the seed head. And just in like my different, and I want to make time for Q&A as well. So just to frame this, if anyone has any sort of questions that you want to ask, there's two ways to do it. You can, one, go ahead and put it into the chat. And two, if it's something more long form, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question as well. So I'll leave just a couple of minutes for that, or about 5 minutes for that. Just the one subtle point I wanted to make before we got off of it. Usually with the fruit trees, when they do these studies on the fruit trees, I talk about this at length in like all of my foraging classes pretty much. So apologize if people have heard this a million times, but the fruits that they test when they're uncontaminated soils, the fruits are often very clean. Surprisingly, the tree may not be. The tree may have uptaken the heavy metals, the contaminants, the pesticides into its bark, its tissues, its roots, and perhaps even its leaves. But oftentimes the fruit will be really clean. So I sometimes will apply this to things like this. And this is not studied yet. I would love for there to be more studies around this kind of stuff. But I always imagine that the seeds are probably the cleaner part. Like if the plant is giving its best to its progeny, to its offspring. So I'm imagining that if you're in an area that you're questioning, the seed heads would probably be the most clean. I'm just hypothesizing here, I'm theorizing, but I would imagine the seed heads might be the cleanest and the straw would be where I'd be a bit more intentional about where I'm harvesting from, just based on that logic.
I'd agree.
Yeah. But it would be cool if people did more studies around this stuff. I really feel like that would be, I guess I have to do it if I'm talking about it. I need to spearhead that. But
I've learned that too, Brian, that the plants bioaccumulate in the roots, the shoots, the leaves, and the seeds and fruits are generally clean. So as we're considering food sovereignty in a city context, that we can think of fruits and seeds as generally cleaner. And not needing to be as aware of if it's right next to heavy metals.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to mention a couple of the medicines that I have right here. So I have this tincture that I'm going to be shaking every day for about 3 weeks, and then I'm going to strain it. And when I start to take this as medicine, I'll take at least a dropper full 3 times a day. And I want to feel it. The thing with herbs is often people give up with herbs because they don't feel it, because they're not taking, either it's not the right herb for them or they're not taking enough. So take an herb until you feel it and dose yourself until you feel that medicine. Here I have an oat, it's wild oat milk. So I took the seed pods here, about 2 cups of those, and simmered them in a quart of water for 45 minutes with the juice of a whole lemon. Again, I brought in the juice, the lemon, to drop the pH to extract more minerals. At that point, I blended them up, and it was a big mashy slurry, and I passed it through a nut milk bag and made this milk that I can put in my tea, that I can just drink straight. And it has the carbohydrate and that latex, the milky white latex of the milky oats. And this only lasts about 3 days, or I could freeze it and have that alcohol-free medicine for the year round.
That sounds delicious.
It's really good. It's very
I gotta try that at some point. Just to round out the conversation, someone's asking if you can suggest any learning resources specifically for oats. I feel like I've checked a few books out from your library before. So is there any like specific herbal texts that you would suggest?
Yeah, I have a couple of my favorite books. Medical Herbalism by David Hoffman is a great text.
And medical herbalism also goes into contraindications and interactions between herbs and more Western medicine.
Yeah.
My understanding. That was a really cool one.
It's an amazing book. Yeah, it looks at all the different body systems from a Western medical perspective, and talks about many different herbs that affect those systems and how they affect it and how they are interrelated. Cool. I really like Maud Grieve. She's a classic. She has a 2-book series called A Modern Herbal, and she explores folklore and historical use of plants and how people have worked with these in a magical way, in a more clinical way, many different perspectives of plants. There's so many ways that people share information about the herbs. Sometimes it's very clinical, like pharmacologically based. Sometimes it's a fairy tale and the oat is the moral of the story. Yes. So yeah, those are 2 of my favorite books. There's a book on phytopharmacology that I'm not remembering the name of, but cool. Kirill, if you have it, maybe you can type it in the text. I think you have it in your space. Yeah, that's an amazing book. Would you hold it up close to the screen and maybe type in the comments? Okay, yeah, Principles and Practices of Phyto. Can you, yeah.
Cool. Principles and Practices of Phytotherapy.
And it talks about all of the medicinal constituents that people have studied so far in many different plants. Okay. It's really study and rigorous based.
And I'll add these into our show notes for the YouTube video as well, so that people can have it all in one spot. Cool. Thanks so much for the input. We had Beatrice was asking, do I teach at Guild Track in Berkeley? Yes, I do, Beatrice. Haven't been teaching any classes recently, obviously. Been doing more virtual stuff, but more to come on that. That's cool. I'm assuming you're affiliated with Guild Track in some way. Very cool. And then what medicine is in the milk rather than the tincture? Someone was asking that. Tony was asking that. Is there any different medicine?
It is more mineral based than the tincture. So the infusion. So I also, while we were out in the field, I harvested both the Milky Oat tops and Oat Straw at its base. And I'm collecting the oats that are just starting, some of them are just starting to brown, but most of them, when I squeeze them, they have a little milky latex still coming out. And I'm gonna hang these up in bunches about that big to dry, and then I will chop them up and put them away for daily use. With this, I make infusions, which is really similar to this medicine right here. And with that, I'm going really for the mineral content.
Cool. So it sounds like the minerals are the main difference there, rather than some of the other properties. Cool. And we're wrapping up on the hour right now. So I suppose we could probably go on for a long time, even more into just this one plant. But
questions?
Yeah, if there's any other pressing questions, I mean, do you have 5 extra minutes?
Yeah.
If so, okay. We won't push too much further outside the boundary, but if anyone has any other questions, now would be the time, or forever hold your peace. And also, once we upload this on YouTube, I'll be checking comments if there's anything else to follow up on. Those resources sound amazing. I'd love to dive into some of those myself. And then, I mean, are you doing herbal consultations, or is that part of your regimen right now?
Yeah, I meet with herbal clients.
Okay.
So I have one-on-one herbal sessions with people, and we talk about what's going on in their life, and we devise herbal formulas and practices for them to connect with the plants and to resolve a whole host of issues, from digestive to sexual reproductive health to menopause, relationship, to working with diet.
Wonderful, wonderful. So it sounds like people can find you on your website to book sessions if they're interested. All right, we don't want to get you too busy, but what's that?
I don't either. I want to.
You want to stay relaxed.
Go out and sit with the oats.
Totally. I trust that you'll be able to just select certain people. Yeah, wonderful. And someone's asking, will you have these Zoom classes again? Yeah, I'm definitely planning on doing these weekly. I was doing them weekly throughout the month of April, and now I'm having people on to actually interact with. So I'm planning on doing it every week. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a guest every single week or not, but I will be planning to do this next Wednesday. Thanks for the question, Beatrice. And yeah, thanks so much for everyone for coming. It's a little bit past 2:30 now.
Such a treat.
Yeah, this is wonderful.
If I can ask.
Please, Jenna.
Is this oat straw? Is this oat, wild oat?
Yeah, that's great. Let's do a little bit of plant ID. So for oats, you have one long stem and then single hairs or single stems that come off of it and a single seed at the end, or a single seed pod. This, if I pull the two black hairs, you can see the black hairs at the base here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
If you pull those apart, you'll see that there's actually 2 or 3 little seeds in here. But the important things to note, you see multiple levels of seed. Out of each level, there's usually anywhere from like 4 to 6 individual strands coming out, each one having a single seed cluster at the end. And this cluster, it has the shape of only having one seed. It looks like only one seed from the outside. Sometimes you'll see these in the field and you'll see like it looks like there are multiple, like maybe 3 or 4 all stacked within one. That's not oats. It's a different kind of grass.
Good. Yeah, that's an important part. I didn't quite see what was on your screen there.
Oh, can you see it?
Could I see too?
Can you all see it? Oh, I see.
I want to spotlight your video. I'm just curious. Oh, okay. Yeah, that looks like what's called a brome. I would call that rip gut brome probably. Yeah, we're getting into some nerdy stuff because grass identification is by no means easy, especially when things are not in seed. But that one I can pretty much identify as that one's called rip gut brome.
There's a couple amazing foraging apps, plant identification apps that we really like. Both Seek, which is by iNaturalist, and Picture This.
Yeah, those are great.
A premium option, which is $30 a year, which makes it a lot better identification processes. Thank you, Kirill, for that tip.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, cool. That was in the chat. Yeah, that's a great app. Cool. I hope you guys will get out there and identify these plants and start working with them. You know, be careful. Make sure you have the 100% identification. It's always great to have somebody with you who knows, for sure. So hopefully we'll be starting up, in-person classes here in the next few weeks to months. We don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just encourage everyone to get out there and interact with these plants. And thank you, Lexi, for being on today and sharing so much.
So fun. Look forward to more classes together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Vicky, Jenna.
Grateful to everybody for coming out.
April, Tony, Deanne, Alyssa, Shen.
Brought the crew.
Gosh, Alan, y'all rock. This is so fun. It's so good to see you.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Such a treat.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions?
If you have something after the fact, we'll hopefully be able to answer them on YouTube. So
yeah, and if you want to email me, I'm on Facebook. I don't like doing PMs on Facebook, but I love email.
Cool.
And I'm writing my email in the chat. Oopsies.
All right.
So feel free to email if you have any questions or any plant things that you want to talk about.
And feel free to get in touch with me on Instagram. That's my Instagram. And this is my email as well. So wonderful, wonderful. Oh yeah, and the YouTube channel is also Healing Ecosystems. So just look up Healing Ecosystems on YouTube. You should find it. I have a lot of other videos from past classes of this too. So
nice.
Wonderful. This was fun, Lexi. I'm really grateful for you. And
what a treat.
Yeah, to be able to share this. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, everyone. Signing off.
Bye, y'all.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Appreciate you. All right. Adios. Happy harvesting, everybody.